They asked me to talk about an overview and a summary of OpenID Connect, which some of you have heard before, and I also wanted to talk about some news and actually give you some homework. This is a talk where intentionally I'm asking many of you who are experts in this do some stuff. So please pay attention for the action items. So how many of you in the room feel like you know what OpenID Connect is? Okay, we're at about half. Okay, that's good data. So the way I ended up structuring this is I wanted to front load a couple things that are completely brand new that most of you've never heard of. I'll talk about that. Now, understanding them completely will require knowing some of the stuff later in the presentation, but I will verbally tie it back. But I wanted to start with the new and exciting stuff first. So a little background. OpenID Connect is a standard that was developed in close collaboration with a whole bunch of different individuals and companies over the years. The first versions finished in 2014, and they've been in pretty widespread deployment today. So what is OpenID Connect? OpenID Connect is a simple identity layer built on top of OAuth 2.0 that enables relying parties to verify the identity of the user and to get basic profile information about the person. And unlike SAML, which came before it, it's not built using XML and SOAP. It's using REST and JSON interfaces. And you can read about the standard there. You're probably already using OpenID Connect. Even though we don't put the brand out in front of people, if you have an Android phone, if you use Microsoft Azure, if you use Google services, if you use Salesforce, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, there's literally hundreds of places that are using OpenID Connect. This last year, the Library of Congress certified their implementations. It just goes on. So two more philosophy and status slides, and I'll get to some new things. Part of why we think this whole project succeeded is we decided to, first and foremost, keep things that could be simple, simple. So that if you weren't doing anything complicated, the way you did it was also not complicated. But at the same time, we recognized that there would be some things that are more complicated that are needed for some use cases. So I'll give the example of encrypting claims that are sent to a relying party. Not everybody needs that, but you do want to make it possible to do that when it is needed. We also had the advantage when we built OpenID Connect of learning from a number of things that came before. Many of the people were very involved in SAML 2. Some people were very involved in OpenID 2.0. And so we were able to think about what are the use cases we want this to meet. And we wanted, consumer, enterprise, mobile, cloud. We wanted good privacy characteristics. We wanted both simple claims and the ability to pull information in from different providers dynamically. And we wanted to keep implementations as simple as possible. We reuse a whole bunch of specs from the ITF, some of which actually were co-built with OpenID Connect, including the JSON Web Token and OAuth 2.0. And you can build only the pieces you need. So that's sort of the very high-level introduction before I give you some new news. Oh, and I should say that we keep winning awards for the work, which I'm very proud with my co-authors to have that be the case. We were recognized in 2012, 2 years before the standard was even done, that this looked like it was going to be a great development. And some of the pieces, like OAuth and JSON Web Token, won awards. And then there was a little break, and then this last year, the certification program for OpenID Connect won 2 awards in Europe. So this is the new stuff that I'm excited to tell you about. One of them is that some of the contributors to the Connect world at Google decided to fund development of some new high-quality relying party libraries because, in a sense, the deployments are usually only as good, both quality and security-wise, as the libraries they use. Not that there's not already some great libraries, but they're intended to be sort of complete functionally and pass the OpenID certification suite, which I'll tell you what that means in a minute. The initial languages that these libraries are targeted at are Python, Java, and JavaScript. More may come. And the Python work has already been contributed to the OpenID Foundation, so is now a project of the OpenID Connect working group. That's brand new, so new that I haven't even sent the note to the Connect working group saying we finished that phase. Note that this is not the first software project that a working group has hosted. There's a set of native application libraries called AppAuth that the Connect working group also is custodian of. So how are these structured? It turns out that there's a number of different layers that you can logically decompose this into, and that's what Roland Hedberg in Sweden, who was the architect of this, did. And again, he had the advantage of, he'd built another Python library before, so he'd known what worked and what mistakes he made, and he got to start over. So all of the, what we call the JOT Connect libraries will have both a JSON Web Token implementation. Adam Dawes paid for this work. Welcome, Adam. There's a message layer for marshalling and demarshalling and serializing. There's a service layer for managing requests and response. And then there's a top layer where you have a simple relying party interface. These are now GitHub projects inside the OpenID Foundation repository. I'm not going to ask you to recite this from memory. These slides will be posted by Identiverse and on my blog and sent to the Connect working group. So your first action item is if you're a Python programmer or you would like to become one, please download these and kick the tires. There's documentation, which is also, I just, this afternoon submitted a pull request, so all this is in the README. There's documentation on how things work. There's also samples for more OpenID providers than I knew these were going to support. Oh, this is going random on me, just like I was warned. So the interesting thing to me about this, and Roland said because of the way they structured it, they're able to subclass for particular OpenID providers, even if they're not speaking the protocol 100% faithfully. For instance, I know they would have to subclass for Facebook because they're not really speaking faithful OpenID Connect, but apparently the libraries make it possible to use that anyway. So, please, oh my gosh, this is really bad. So, please do give these a try, or if you have friends in the Python world, please have them give it a try. First action item. The second thing that's new that we've never talked about in a presentation before, oh my gosh. Okay, the AV guys need to replace this soon. It's clicking without user input. Yeah, not my input. Maybe you're thinking it, Alex. So there's an OpenID certification program, which I'll give you the overview of in just a minute. But the cool new thing is we are now at Identiverse just today launching testing for a new set of profiles for identity providers and relying parties. Those of you who knew and loved SAML may know about sending responses via form post. And it turns out that there's a spec in OpenID Connect that also does that. So there's now tests that you can test against your implementations that do form post response mode. I know that Microsoft's Azure implementation implements this. I know that Ping Federate implements it, and some others. So what does this do? It verifies that when you send a, wow, 3 slides off. It verifies that, wow. Pick any slide. Oh, now we're short of the This can go back as a form post rather than as fragments, which in some of the browser and response types is the default, but it's more secure, and some programmers like it better to do the form post. So we check that you're actually doing that. And we check it not only for a successful response, but we make sure that you're posting the error responses back in the same mechanism. So this is the next action item. If you have a relying party library, or if you have an OpenID Connect identity provider, please run these tests against your code. They're actually very small. You don't have to do very much. And if you already have a certification testing configuration, you can just check a box and these new tests light up. So please try this against your implementations. Because this is new, we always put new certification tests into pilot mode and are available to all OpenID Foundation members for certification for free until we feel like we've tested the tests enough to say these are rock solid. We'll add them to the production program. So that's the second new thing in your second action item. All right, now I'm going to sort of step back to for those of you who may not have seen it before or may not know how it works. So when we finished the specs in 2014, this is what the diagram of the specs looked like. Pam happened to draw this in 2014 when she was at Ping Identity. There's dynamic registration, so you don't have to pre-establish relationships between all the parties. There's logout, there's the form post response mode we talked about. And as I said verbally, all of this is built on top of a bunch of IETF specs that we had built at the same time, and for instance, the JSON Web Token. Now there's some current work in the OpenID Foundation. Those were all final specs. The logout specs, and yes, there's multiple ones, which I'll talk about in a minute, are implementers drafts, meaning they're nearly done, and the working group recently made a decision to take them final. The reason that there's multiple ones is the web is a funny place.